The man's hand closed around my forearm so lightly I almost mistook it for someone brushing past. I'd just turned toward the departure gate boarding pass, in one hand, the other, adjusting the strap of my purse. Then the whisper came steady, controlled close enough that I felt the breath of it on my skin. Pretend I'm arresting you. Don't react. Your son just slipped something in your water. For a moment, I couldn't tell if the words were real or if my brain had misfired under the fluorescent lights. "Excuse me," I breathed. His grip tightened not enough to hurt, just enough to warn. "You're in danger. This is not a drill. Walk with me." The airport around us, rolling suitcases, chatter announcements, blurred into a distant hum. My feet moved before the rest of me caught up. He guided me past the security podium, through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," and into a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of cold air and industrial cleaner. "Sit," he instructed, nodding toward a metal chair against the wall. I sat. My pulse hammered in my wrists. He pulled up a monitor, tapped twice, and a grainy recording from 10 minutes earlier filled the screen. There was my son, Cole, head bowed, jaw tight, standing near my carry-on while I checked the flight information board. His hand lifted, slipping inside his coat, a small vial. He uncapped it with one quick flick, looked around once, then poured it straight into my water bottle. In the footage, he smiled afterward. A soft, casual smile. The kind you give when you're fixing something, helping someone, doing something normal. Except nothing about it was normal. My stomach dropped. I'd organized this trip months ago. My idea, my money, my attempt to rebuild the thin, frayed line connecting us. I'd told myself he'd changed since falling into debt, that maybe time and distance had softened him. But apparently, he hadn't waited for the plane to take off to decide I was worth more gone than alive. The agent turned off the monitor and looked at me carefully. "We need to decide what happens next." And just like that, the floor shifted beneath everything I thought I knew, pulling me toward a truth I wasn't ready to face in the minutes before boarding. There were two options on the table, laid out cleanly by the agent, like a menu I never wanted to read. Option 1, alert the Spanish authorities, pull Cole and Tessa from the boarding list, and begin a cross-border investigation that might fall apart before it began. Option 2, get on the flight, pretend I knew nothing, eat nothing. They offered me drink only from sealed containers provided by airport staff and let them keep watching. I chose the second. Not because I was brave, but because I wanted to know just how far they were willing to go. When I returned to the gate, Cole was checking his watch. Tessa smiled like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. "There you are," she said, looping her arm through mine. "We thought maybe you got cold feet." "Never," I answered. On the plane, Cole offered me the window seat. I thanked him and sat down, the familiar ache in my hip pressing against the armrest. My bag rested in my lap. Inside it, a sealed bottle of water handed to me by a TSA officer in the hallway. Cole handed me another bottle. "This one's already open," he said. I took a sip, "But it's good." I smiled. "Thanks," I said, accepting it. Then, as he turned to adjust his backpack, I slipped it into the seat pocket in front of me and quietly swapped in the sealed one. Tessa leaned across the aisle and touched my arm. Her tone was light, careful. "I'm really glad you're here, Corinne. We were worried you'd change your mind at the last minute." I uncapped the safe bottle and took a sip, my eyes never leaving hers. Why would I do that? She blinked just once, but it was enough. The plane began to taxi. The safety video played. Outside the window, the sky was graying at the edges. I rested my hands calmly on my knees and listened to the quiet hum of takeoff. Whatever was going to happen next would happen in the air. The seatbelt sign had just gone off when Cole leaned in, lowering his voice like we were trading secrets. So he said, "There's a villa just outside Valencia I think you'll love. Ocean view, olive trees all gated. We set up a surprise tour for the day after we land. I tilted my head slightly. Oh yeah, he smiled. It fits perfectly with the inheritance strategy we talked about. Remember, I didn't remember. Because we hadn't talked, Tessa jumped in, smoothing her sweater. We know how important location is. And with the market right now, the timing couldn't be better. We could close in under a week. She said we. I nodded, letting the silence do the work. Sounds promising? I murmured, then reached for the in-flight magazine pretending to read. Cole wasn't finished. Did you get a chance to sign those updated estate documents I emailed them a few days ago? I gave a small shrug. I'll check when we have Wi-Fi. He smiled, but the edge of impatience sharpened it. I excused myself to the restroom and locked the door behind me. The hum of the engine masked the sound of the paper unfolding from inside my passport sleeve. I hadn't looked at it until now. Debt $843.20. Multiple personal loans. Flagged offshore account linked to Cole Halstead. Significant transfer attempts from elder managed funds. I stared at the page until the words blurred, then folded it sharply down the middle and flushed it. When I returned to my seat, Cole looked up from his tablet like nothing had happened. All good, he asked. Perfect, I said, settling in. But his calm was too still measured in a way that didn't fit the gentle turbulence outside. And I realized then that he wasn't nervous because he thought he might fail. He was calm because he thought he'd already won. I reached for my tea, still sealed, still safe. Tessa was watching me now. Not smiling, not blinking. Just watching. Cole waited until the cabin lights dimmed and the flight attendants began handing out the customs forms. Then he leaned over with a tablet, already glowing in his hand. I just want your eyes on something, he said, casual. It's just a draft. He handed it to me like it was a game score or a hotel itinerary. I scrolled slowly. It was a power of attorney broad sweeping, dressed in neutral language, and buried 3/4 down a clause. One that transferred all liquid and retirement assets in the event of permanent mental or physical incapacitation. No second sign-off, no medical certification required. I tapped the screen with my finger. This part here. What defines incapacitation? Cole shifted slightly. It's standard. Just protection stuff. Nothing would move unless something happened to you. He smiled again, that same easy grin he used when he was 8, and caught with a broken lamp behind his back. Across the aisle, Tessa watched us pretending not to listen. I smiled too. Let's review it when we land. I handed back the tablet without another word. My voice had stayed level, but my hands trembled slightly under the tray table. The last time I'd seen real warmth in his eyes was 5 years ago, the week before his business began to unravel. That Thanksgiving, he'd sat at my kitchen table pushing stuffing around on his plate while trying to convince me to co-sign a loan using my house as collateral. When I said no, his fork clinked against the plate. He left early, never hugged me goodbye. And now here we were, 5 years later, different continent, same reach. The flight attendants began collecting trash. I held onto my cup a little longer, keeping the sealed lid pressed against my palm. Outside the window, the dark stretched wide and soundless. Inside, their plans tightened around me like invisible thread. We had 5 more hours in the air. And they had no idea I was already playing a different game. After the dinner trays were cleared, Tessa reached into her tote and pulled out a small travel thermos, glossy and floral. It's herbal, she said, softly, handing it across the aisle. Chamomile with some valerian root. Helps with jet lag. Her voice was even too warm to raise suspicion, but her fingers held the bottle just a second too long before letting go. I unscrewed the lid and lifted it to my nose. The scent was faint, barely there. I smiled. How thoughtful, I murmured, then tucked it into my lap and excused myself to the lavatory. Inside, I flipped open the lid again and tilted the bottle over the sink. The liquid was pale amber, slow-moving. I watched it swirl, then disappear down the drain. After rinsing it thoroughly, I dried the inside with paper towels and replaced the cap. I returned to my seat and offered Tessa a smile. "Thanks. I feel better already." She nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. An hour passed. Cole had slipped into a light doze mouth, slightly open, arms crossed over his chest like a boy on a field trip. Tessa scrolled through her phone with one hand and picked at her cuticle with the other. I reached up and touched my earring slowly, casually. The left one. The TSA agent had replaced it while handing back my passport. The mic was built into the post. All I had to do was speak. So I did. "I've made my decision about the trust," I said, loud enough to carry across the row, but soft enough not to draw attention. Tessa froze mid-scroll. Cole's eyes opened instantly, no trace of sleep left in them. "What decision?" he asked, voice carefully. "Neutral. I'll explain when we land," I said. He leaned forward slightly, trying to read me. But I kept my expression soft. My hands relaxed in my lap. Outside, the lights over the Atlantic shimmered faintly through the clouds. Inside, the quiet between us began to hum with something darker. I reached for my bag again as the captain announced we'd begin our descent in 45 minutes. Madrid's air was warmer than expected, a strange softness under the airport lights. I followed them through the terminal, moving a beat behind, watching more than walking. At baggage claim, the carousel churned out a blur of familiar black suitcases. Mine was easy to spot, an old roller bag with a scuffed handle and a fraying zipper pull. I stepped toward it, but Cole intercepted. "I got it, Mom," he said quickly. "We'll get through customs faster if I handle it." I let go. "Sure." He hoisted it off the belt and wheeled it toward the exit, Tessa at his side. But as they paused to shift bags, I saw him crouch. A flick of the wrist, a swift removal of my tag, and a replacement with one from another identical suitcase sitting nearby. I kept walking. At the customs checkpoint, I slowed as we passed a Spanish officer near the lane divider. I stepped slightly off course and spoke in low English. "I think someone's confused their luggage," I said, nodding toward Cole and Tessa. The officer blinked, then followed the direction of my gaze. 10 minutes later, we were pulled aside. Tessa's tone turned sharp. "Is there a problem?" The officer asked her to open the bag. She hesitated. "It's just her clothes," Cole said, voice too firm. "There's nothing." "Open it," the officer repeated. Tessa knelt and unzipped the case. Inside were no clothes, no shoes, no toiletries, just rows of vacuum-sealed plastic packets labeled in a language I didn't recognize. The room shifted. The officer called for backup. I stepped back silent. Tessa began stammering. Cole's hand twitched at his side. I said nothing, just watched, just breathed. Their story was unraveling without a single word from me. As another officer approached with gloves and a clipboard, I turned toward the frosted glass doors at the far end of the corridor. They separated us the moment we were moved to the secondary screening area. Tessa was escorted left, Cole right. I was led to a plain white room with a table, 2 chairs, and a single folder already waiting. The officer across from me spoke quietly and clearly in English. Name, Corinne Halstead. Occupation, retired nurse. Widowed. I live in Oregon. I handed over my passport and waited. My hands didn't shake. I'd spent enough time around fear in hospital corridors to recognize when it wasn't mine. When he asked if I had anything else relevant to share, I reached into the inner lining of my jacket and pulled out the flash drive. "This was given to me by TSA in Portland," I said. "You'll want to look at the last timestamp." He raised a brow, took the drive, and plugged it in. I didn't need to watch the screen to know what he was seeing. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Cole unscrewing the water bottle cap adding something to the drink. The brief whisper to me at the gate. My face as I was led away unaware, but already unraveling the lie. They questioned me for nearly an hour more. I answered every query. When they asked about the suitcase, I said I hadn't packed it. When they asked if I'd ever given anyone power of attorney, I said no. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, I said not yet. Eventually, the officer returned and handed me my passport. They're not being charged, he said, but they will be denied re-entry to Spain. That will go on record. Outside in the echo of the terminal, I passed Cole and Tessa as they gathered their things. Why didn't you just say something? Cole hissed, voice low, furious. We could have handled this like a family. I didn't answer. I looked past him, past the signs toward the glass doors leading to the street. Because whatever we were before, we weren't family now. And I had one last stop to make before I disappeared from their map entirely. The apartment was still dimmed by drawn curtains and the dust of time. I didn't turn on the lights, just walked through the silence until I reached the desk in the corner, the one we'd kept locked since Peter passed. The key was still taped to the back of the top drawer. I peeled it off, sat down, and opened the small compartment. Inside was a single envelope, the edges yellowed. His handwriting across the front, only if they start circling. I unfolded the letter carefully. His words were brief, measured, just like he always was. Corinne, if they ever circle like vultures, if they speak more about what they're owed than what they've given, remember this: love and loyalty don't always come together. Don't confuse the two. I trust you'll know what to do. He'd written it 5 years ago. The same autumn his voice started shaking on cold mornings. Before the diagnosis turned our lives into countdowns, he'd seen it. In Cole, in Tessa, in the way small favors were framed like debts. I had told him he was being harsh, that our son just needed time. I hadn't wanted to see it. But Peter had, and now I couldn't unsee it either. I folded the letter back into its envelope and returned it to the drawer. But I didn't lock it this time. Instead, I turned to the folder I kept in the cabinet above, legal papers, titles, my updated will. I made one more call to the attorney. Nothing would go to Cole. No pension, no accounts, no house. Instead, it would all fund a scholarship one for nursing students from rural towns who stayed in their patients' rooms long after visitors left, who showed up early, stayed late, remembered names even when no one thanked them. I signed my name slowly once more and placed the papers in their envelope. By the time I went to bed, I had finally put something in place that didn't ask to be earned by blood, just by care. It came on a Tuesday mid-morning. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice was softer than it had been in years. Not gentle, but measured. Practiced. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, "about how everything played out. I know it looked bad. It felt worse than it was." I didn't respond. The kettle was just beginning to hum on the stove. "We were stressed," he continued. "Tessa's business is barely hanging on. I took some bad advice. We didn't mean to make you feel unsafe." "Make me feel unsafe." He said it like I'd misunderstood something minor, like fear could be negotiated. "I just think maybe we could talk things through," he added, "face to face." I stayed quiet for a long breath. Then I asked, "Do you remember the summer you broke your arm on the swing set behind the school?" He hesitated. "Yeah, of course. You cried so hard I thought you'd pass out," I said. "You couldn't walk, so I carried you down the hill." "All the way to the car?" He let out a small laugh. "I remember that. I carried you a long way, Cole." He was quiet again. I let the silence settle. Then I said gently, "But I don't carry you now." He didn't respond. I ended the call and set the phone down on the counter. I stood there for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of finality. Then I picked it back up, blocked the number, and placed the phone face down. The kettle began to whistle. Outside, the sky was gray but quiet, and in the stillness, I felt no weight pulling on my shoulders. Just space. There would be no more calls. No more justifications wrapped in softness. Only one final act to complete. One final trip before I closed the door entirely. The plane touched down just before noon. I didn't check a bag. Just carried a canvas tote and the envelope with my updated documents. The air smelled different the moment I stepped outside, wet, briny, untangled from the rest of the world. I rented a car without small talk. The drive was familiar, all bends and moss and old trees, arching overhead like they remembered me. When I reached the cottage, I parked under the same leaning pine that had dropped cones across the driveway every fall. The gate creaked when I pushed it open. The key slid into the lock without resistance. Peter's touch was still here in the paint strokes on the porch railing and the new boards he'd nailed in one summer, after a storm peeled the siding back like paper. Inside, it smelled like salt and cedar. And something else? Something settled. I lit the stove and brewed real tea. No capsules, no strange bottles, just leaves and water. Then I sat at the small table in the corner and opened my phone. I changed the passcode, erased my old accounts, set everything to private. There would be no more updates, no public trail, no forwarding address. The cottage didn't have Wi-Fi. It didn't need it. Later, I walked out to the edge of the dunes. The sea rolled in and out, steady, unbothered. The wind tugged at the ends of my sleeves, then let go. There was no sound but the waves. No one called my name. No one asked for anything. I didn't miss the noise, or the reaching, or the bending I used to do just to hold on to something that was already letting go. I stayed until the sky dimmed. Then I walked back up the path, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me. I didn't lock it. I just listened to the quiet and knew it belonged to me now.